I'm very pleased now to be joined by Steve Gardner of USA Today to talk all things spring training and also a little bit of fantasy baseball as well. He's going to kind of hold my hand and walk me through it. Hey, Steve, thanks for being with me.
Thanks for the invite, Carolyn. Good to talk to you.
It's good to talk to you, too. I know you cover everything related to Major League Baseball. I want to start with this idea that a salary cap could maybe be coming. I mean, you look at some of the trends in the sport, and it's hard to ignore the parity or the lack thereof that exists here when you've got a team like the Mets who have spent like crazy in the offseason, or the Phillies, for example. And then you've got some teams out west whose payroll is under $50 million. I mean, what is the talk around that heading into this season at spring training, with some feeling like maybe we could be heading for a reckoning here?
Well, I think the owners need to figure things out among themselves. I mean, essentially, a salary cap is a way for the owners to not have to spend so much on payroll. And some of the owners, Steve Cohen for the Mets, coming in and doing that an awful lot and spending a lot of his cash, that's got a few of them upset. And even, when the Padres, one of the smallest market franchises in all of baseball, go out and spend on Manny Machado a huge contract extension, signing Xander Bogaerts. They were in on some of the other free agents, too, that signed elsewhere this offseason. So it's really a matter of just kind of the will of what ownership and the front office wants to do. I think that, the smaller markets are complaining, but really, if you're wealthy enough to own a Major League Baseball team, then you're probably wealthy enough to be able to pay a significant amount in payroll to get your team competitive.
As you look at the last decade or so, has it typically been the teams where ownership goes out and spends that translates to success, or is it more evenly split than one might think? I mean, common logic would say, all right, you go out and spend $500 million in a winter, you're on your way to a World Series. But even last season, we saw the Mets, the Yankees, some of these teams with huge payrolls fall short of that.
Well, you can only get two teams in the World Series, so it does weed those teams out, even if they do spend a lot. The Tampa Bay Rays have been kind of the exception to the rule because they haven't had a huge payroll. They don't have huge revenue streams, but they had a successful front office, and they have for a long time because of the way that they do things and the analytics that they put into the game and the personnel decisions and player development. So there are ways to get there. The Pittsburgh Pirates have been playoff teams in the past because they've had good teams and they've developed that talent. So it's not impossible. There is parity to some degree, but yes, when you have a lot of money, you're able to sign the big name free agents. You're able to keep your own free agents that have come up through the system. That's a huge advantage. And also, don't forget, when it comes trade deadline time too, you have to have assets to be able to trade. And, the wealthier teams most often do. So, yes, it's a big advantage, but winning on a shoestring budget is something that we've seen can be done.
Is a salary cap potentially coming? I mean, there have been kind of some rumors about the next collective bargaining agreement. Is that what the future looks like for Major League Baseball?
We just got through the last collective bargaining agreement, and now we're looking ahead to 2026. I can't imagine, having that looming over all of our heads for the next couple of years. I think the owners will try and get something similar to that. And I also think that the Players Association has historically been so far against and unanimously against any kind of a salary cap that I think they're willing to go to the mat, so to speak, to not have that put into baseball. I think the Baseball Players Association has been historically one of the strongest unions, the largest unions in all of professional sports. And I think they use that to their advantage. And right now, they seem to be as solid as ever in being against ever having a salary cap. Tony Clark, the executive director, made comments to that effect just in the last couple of days talking about that issue.
There are a number of rule changes coming for the regular season this year that a lot of people have been talking about, and efforts in earnest, I think, to speed up a game that some people feel like they don't have an attention span for anymore. I mean, you have this kind of battle between the purists who love the nuances of the sport and don't want it changed, and then this idea that maybe having a shorter game will attract a new audience. Where do you stand on some of the rule changes, and do you think that a faster game is ultimately better for the sport?
Well, I'm somebody who's, grown up with baseball, watched baseball, been a fan of baseball for a long time. I'd consider myself a traditionalist, but I feel like it's something that baseball needs to at least try. And I think the object of the rules changes as they've been put into effect this season are good ones. I think that, we do need to speed up the pace of play a little bit, as pitchers have held the ball and batters have stepped out of the batter's box. The lack of balls in play, I think, has also contributed to the perception that baseball is a boring sport because nothing's going on. All of these rules kind of impact that. We'll see more stolen bases now, I think, with the bases larger, the fewer pickoff moves, a limit of 2 pickoff moves for the pitchers every plate appearance, and just keeping the batter in the batter's box, the pitcher on the pitching rubber, and telling him you've got 15 seconds or 20 seconds when they're runners on base before you have to deliver a pitch. I think that's a good thing for baseball. And I also believe that the players will adapt to it. And while we may see some violations in spring training, as we have already, by the time the regular season starts, everybody should kind of be on board and know what to expect. And I think a month into the season, we may not even, think about the new rules changes, or at least most of them.
Is a goal to exactly that, to have it just be a little bit faster, but not so overwhelming that it's noticeable?
Yeah, I think so. And you look at some of the videos and footage from games in the 1970s where there wasn't any dilly-dallying around, and you saw the game kind of move along. Baseball, obviously, it's got its own pace, its own rhythm. And I think one of the things, if you're a traditionalist, you don't want to see a clock in baseball because baseball is played by innings. And that's what it's always been different from other sports in that way. But I think the pitch clock just reminds us we need to keep the action going. The changes with the shift change and banning the shift defensively, we'll get more balls in play. Maybe we'll see a handful more base hits. The batting average overall will go up a little bit. Singles have been at an all-time low the last 3 seasons. So people want to see base hits, want to see good fielding plays, which banning of the shift will kind of at least encourage those, and get the game to where it's, it'll moving at a little bit crisper pace and taking some of the dead time out of the game. And I think that's a good thing.
Are there teams in your mind already, Steve, that you feel like are set up to benefit from these rule changes right out of the gate? I mean, we know the big home run teams, the Yankees did it all year long, and I think some people were crying for small ball towards the end of the year as the playoffs were nearing. Which teams sort of jump out to you that might benefit from these changes?
Well, I don't know that it's going to bring small ball. Maybe teams with a little bit more team speed will be able to take advantage of the larger bases. I think we'll see a good number more stolen base attempts in the game. So teams with a lot of speed that like to run, I think we'll be able to take advantage of it. Maybe some teams with heavy left-handed pull hitters will be able to take advantage a little bit. I seem to think that those changes and those differences will be minimal. We'll look to maybe the front offices and the analytics departments for these particular major league teams. Mentioned the Rays earlier about how savvy they are. The Dodgers also have an extensive analytics department, and looking for ways, how the shift developed was teams just looking for an extra edge, a little bit more to, turn a few more balls in play into outs. I think with the new rules, the teams that are able to think outside the box a little bit, see what's going on, with the 2 pickoff moves maximum per plate appearance. How do you do that? Do you just throw over once and then, don't worry about it anymore? Do you get an extra jump if you're a runner on base? I think we'll see a lot of these techniques develop in spring training to where the really smart teams will be able to use these rules to their advantage and be on the leading edge of that, while the other teams that are maybe a little bit slower take time to catch up.
What's the reaction been like from the majority of pitchers at spring training so far? I imagine there's a little bit of growing pains, getting used to everything. Has it been positive? Is it going to be a work in progress?
I think Max Scherzer kind of summed it up the best the other day, because he said, I'm in more control now because I know the batter has got to be in the batter's box within 8 seconds left on the clock. I get to hold the ball as long as I want, as long as I'm ready. They have, the pitch comm where pitchers are able to push a button on their wrist and are able to call pitches without having to have the catcher go through the signs, which is another thing that has delayed the game a little bit sometimes. So the pitchers, I think, at least most of them that I've seen comment about the new rules changes, feel like they're a little bit more in control, and pitchers are generally ahead of hitters in spring training anyway. So you add that on top of things. I think the pitchers are going to like this. And so far, at least in Scherzer's case, he loves it. He loves being in control. And I'd like to see that kind of competitiveness. And I think other pitchers will follow suit.
A lot of people who follow you, Steve, know you for your fantasy expertise. How do these rule changes affect who people might select?
It's tough. You look at, for instance, the shift rule, which players have been impacted the most, have hit into the most ground ball outs with the shift. Corey Seager is one of those that comes to mind immediately. Led, I think, the major leagues last year in ground ball outs to the pull side. So if he's got more room to hit and there are more holes for him to find, he could be one of them. Kyle Schwarber, I think, will benefit, maybe not so much from the rule changes, but he's got Trey Turner there in Philadelphia now in that leadoff spot. And Trey Turner's going to be on base an awful lot. They're going to be holding him on, and there's going to be more holes for Kyle Schwarber to aim at. And with Trey Turner, the pitchers are going to have to pay attention to him if he's going to run, if he's not. So there are different levels. Kyle Tucker also from Houston can benefit in a couple of different ways. As a left-handed hitter who pulls the ball a decent amount, he could benefit from the shift rules. And because he likes to run and steal bases, he could be a beneficial, somebody who benefits from that rule as well.
It's interesting, Steve, when people are trying to kind of assemble their lineups for fantasy. I think one of the questions people ask, or you tell me, is they're trying to positionally figure out who has value. I mean, is there less of a value? Is there more value with starting pitchers versus closers when you consider the fact that starters these days aren't throwing quite as many innings as they used to? How do you manage the math on a rotation for fantasy?
Well, generally, starting pitchers are taken a lot earlier in fantasy drafts, have a lot more value because there are a lot of them. And the best ones can dominate games. And you want to get pitchers who get lots of innings, lots of strikeouts especially. So those ace starters that'll go every 5 days will get wins and rack up the stats and strikeouts and everything else. Those are the ones that are the most valuable. I think closers have lost a little bit of value in general because so many Major League Baseball teams have gone to the closer committee and haven't really committed to one particular closer. In general, it makes closers less valuable. But then again, Edwin Diaz, Ryan Presley, Josh Hader, those guys who are lockdown closers on their teams and are going to get the ball every time pretty much in save situations, they become even more valuable. So at the top end, the closers may be a little bit more valuable these days, but in general, starting pitchers are the coin of the realm. You've got to have them. They've got to produce for you. And the good ones are hard to find, especially later on in the season.
And where would you suggest people start in terms of their batting order or trying to figure out where they might be able to get a little bit of value?
Well, I think most of the first round, I would say, depending on how big fantasy leagues are going to be hitters. And the first few picks that you're going to make are going to be the 5 category type hitters that we love. The power, they have speed, they score runs, they hit high in the batting lineup. Those 5 players, generally in most drafts, Ronald Acuna, Trey Turner, Jose Ramirez, Aaron Judge, and Julio Rodriguez. Those are the consensus top 5 pretty much anywhere you go in leagues that have both AL and NL players. So those guys that can do it all are so valuable, especially now when you see a little bit more specialization and you're kind of unsure how maybe the rules might affect other players. Those guys are going to be rock solid.
The consistency with those guys is just remarkable. I mean, they deliver every single week. But Give me some names of some guys that people might not be thinking about that might be a good ad maybe later on in the draft once those big power hitters are gone or once the starting pitchers are gone. Where do you go from there?
Well, some of my favorite later round picks. I looked to the Cleveland Guardians and Andres Jimenez had a breakout season last year. Good power, his power developed, and also he stole a lot of bases as well. Again, looking for those. Some of the more interesting. You look at what Julio Rodriguez did last year for the Seattle Mariners. Kind of came on the scene, skipped AAA, and became one of the best players because he could hit for power, stole a lot of bases. We may see Jordan Walker, another prospect for the St. Louis Cardinals organization, do sort of the same things this year. Same age. If he makes the team out of spring training, keep an eye on that. He will skip AAA and go directly from AA to the majors. Same age, power, speed combination. And I think his first at bat or his first game in spring training, hit a massive home run. So a lot of Cardinals are going to be participating in the World Baseball Classic too. So that'll give him a lot more opportunity during spring training games. Those are a couple of guys that I like. On the pitching side, Spencer Strider made huge gains last year for Atlanta and is one of the top 5 pitchers in my book this season. Even though he's not throwing a whole lot of innings and didn't do it last year, he still reached 200 strikeouts faster or in fewer innings than any pitcher ever in the major leagues. So definitely he's going to go high in drafts, but he could be very, very valuable.
And as you look at the numbers, Steve, which admittedly is not my strength, statistically, are there certain indicators of players that might have fantasy value or value that you might not expect? I mean, obviously RBI and batting average, runs scored, all that kind of stuff seems to be a pretty easy indication of success. But is there anything else that you sort of look at when you dig into the numbers that actually might have value that people might not be paying attention to?
Well, I think looking at playing time, I think that's one of the things, you can crunch all the numbers you want and see all the rankings and everything. But if you're looking at which players are going to be in the lineups on a regular basis and which players maybe have better health records than others and aren't injured as much. Availability, they say, is the best ability. And being on the diamond and being in the lineup, there's huge value in that. So those are some of the things that I look at. Somebody like, say, an Adalberto Mondesi, who has talent. He can hit for power. He great stolen base capabilities, but just can't stay healthy. Those are the guys you kind of worry about. And Fernando Tatis as well. Not looking for value, but maybe on the other side of the coin, somebody who hasn't stayed healthy and may not benefit from the new rules changes for stolen bases because the Padres want to keep him healthy. So those are some of the things that I look at. You can't really quantify them, as I said, but if you come down to maybe a situation where you're looking at one person or one player versus another, maybe that could be a deciding factor.
Yeah. How do you manage rolling the dice with that kind of risk for injury? If a guy like DeGrom, for example, is really kind of attractive because you think, man, if he could do what he's capable of at any point in the season, that would be a huge payoff for your fantasy team. Or a Verlander or Scherzer, a veteran who's proven. It seems like that's a little bit risky, even though those guys seemingly on paper would be guaranteed. I mean, how do you manage big names versus, like you said, the consistency and games played?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, Verlander kind of broke the system last year because he was coming back from missing an entire season because of Tommy John surgery. There was the re-injury risk, and he goes out and has one of the best seasons, in the last 50 for any pitcher, starting pitcher in baseball. So it's once you think you may have the idea, somebody comes along and blows your theory out of the water. I think the way to deal with that is to maybe take a couple of shots and go with some risky players with high upsides, preferably later on in the later rounds of your draft, and just sort of limit yourself to maybe 1 or 2 shots that you take on those high upside players. Play it safe with the rest of your roster. The early picks, you really want safety more so than upside. and allow yourself a little bit of wiggle room maybe in some of those later picks. If you take, say, a DeGrom in the third or fourth round, go safe for a while and maybe wait until you take a shot on somebody else who's similarly risky.
And which young players are you most excited about?
I think Jordan Walker is one. I think there's an interesting crop of young catchers that are coming up to where catching has been sort of a thin position. It's really developed some depth with Adley Rutschman, who came up last year, MJ Melendez in Kansas City. Gabriel Moreno was traded from Toronto to Arizona in the Dalton Varsho and Lourdes Gurriel trade. He could be a starting catcher and play an awful lot this year. And then you've got some others, Logan O'Hoppe for the Angels, Bo Naylor possibly later on for the Guardians. I love the depth at catcher. So that's an area that I'm looking at. Some others, perhaps third base too. Josh Jung for the Texas Rangers. Good young player, good prospect, just got a little taste of Major League Baseball. I think that's one thing too. And Gunnar Henderson for the Orioles. Guys that have gotten a little bit of Major League experience last season, maybe it's September, coming back now, getting a full spring training and making the roster out of spring training. Those players are ones I love to keep an eye on and add to my team.
Do you think, Steve, that the shorter games will improve TV ratings? I mean, there's this constant kind of storyline with regional sports networks and the future of TV and the future of games and where they're going to live. You talk about, the shortening of the rules and all this stuff, maybe not having as much of a tangible effect as one might think. But if you can turn on a baseball game and know that it's not going to exceed 3 hours or whatever it might be, do you think that ultimately will have an effect on ratings?
I do, to some degree. I don't think it's a panacea by any means. We're not going to see NFL type ratings for Major League Baseball, obviously. The thing with baseball, though, is it's a regional game. The regional sports networks their teams are very highly rated on those cable channels, and the people follow their teams locally. So you're not going to get to measure national ratings on a game of the week or an ESPN game or a TBS game. Measuring those ratings doesn't really give you an accurate reflection of what baseball's popularity is, at least not in my mind. And I think these new rules might bring some more casual fans in on a local basis. Maybe it'll bring them in on a national basis, but still, you've got the playoffs. The playoffs are the real draw. That's when it gets exciting. And so if there's more interest built up during the course of the season, teams are competitive. The playoff spots, the playoff races are exciting. I think that will help. I think the rules will help contribute to that. And, as baseball is a more exciting sport during the season, I think the popularity will continue into the postseason. So baseball, you may not see the results of everything immediately, but I think they're going in the right direction, and you will see results over time.
And just lastly, because I've kept you too long, what are you most excited about heading into the season? I don't know why I feel like this is going to be the year for the Mets. I thought that last year they were disappointing in the postseason. Who do you have a good feeling about in spring training, and what are you most excited about?
Well, I'm excited to see some of the newcomers, how they perform with their new teams. What the Mets are going to do with Scherzer and Verlander on the mound. That's going to be fun to watch those two guys go in consecutive games. How are the Padres going to gel together? I mean, they've made this whole big offseason spending spree. Will it translate into wins? The Dodgers have had, kind of a quiet offseason and then lost, their starting shortstop, Gavin Lux, for the season. Does that vault the Padres over the Dodgers, who have won the division? It seems like 10 out of the last 11 years, something like that. So that's going to be fun. The pennant races, especially in the NL East with the Mets, the Phillies, the Braves. I think that's going to be exciting. And of course, the AL East, the Yankees are going to be there. Aaron Judge, my goodness, I can't believe, we haven't talked more about him after the great season that he had. What's he going to do for an encore? I mean, there's so many things, so many storylines. And and I says the young players coming up, adding some excitement as well to Major League Baseball, and the uncertainty of the rule changes. How will they play out? Just so many storylines, so many things to catch our attention and be excited about in 2023.
Do you think Aaron Judge is happy in New York as a captain of this iconic franchise? I mean, there was much made at the end of last year about the contract negotiations and the way that he put his money where his mouth is, improved himself, that he might want to get out of town, that the pressure might be too much, that he was annoyed. Do you think he's happy?
Absolutely. You could tell the pressure was tremendous, but I think he's somebody that embraces that kind of pressure. And to be on the stage in New York, if you're a star, there's no better place to be. And the Yankee fans adore him. I think there would have been an uprising among Yankee fans had they not opened the purse strings and emptied the vault for him. He's beloved there. The captainship just adds to the tradition which the Yankee franchise has so much of. That it's just a perfect fit. I could not see Aaron Judge, even though he visited other places. I could not see him signing anywhere else. I think it's a perfect fit, both for the player and for the team.
Steve Gardner of USA Today, thank you so much for the time. Just remind everybody where they can find your fantasy advice, because I know a lot of people are interested in keeping tabs with you as the season goes on.
Sure. Thanks, Carolyn. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Steve A. Gardner, and you can find my work at the USA Today. And fantasy stuff at fantasy.usatoday. And if you're into print, the pages of USA Today Sports Weekly, which is on newsstands everywhere you look.
Steve, thank you so much.
Thank you, Carolyn.